Okay, so today we're doing 3.1, which is quadratic functions and models. You guys did quadratic functions in chapter 2 of Algebra 2. Some of you last year, some of you a couple years ago. So what we're going to do is we're going to write polynomials in standard form today, and we're going to find the minimum and maximum of a function using algebra, which means we're not going to be using our graphing calculators, which also means you're going to have a portion that is no calculator on your next quiz and your next test. Okay, so this textbook is a little bit different. I'm going to write this out with you. So standard form, a quadratic function can be written in standard form using the method of completing the square, which we've already talked about this year. And of course you talked about it last year. But for some reason people tend to forget the process of completing the square. Some people are comfortable with it, and that's going to make this section so much easier for you. Some of you are going to need a refresher, which is why we're going to be going over it together. So one thing about this textbook is the standard form is what you are used to seeing as vertex form in your Algebra 2 book. Personally, I don't really like that they call this standard form, but I didn't write the textbook, so what can I do, right? Notice that you have a negative here, and this means opposite. Okay, so sometimes you are used to seeing a different form, which is f of x equals ax squared plus bx plus c. Isn't that what you guys are used to seeing as standard form? And this is what you're used to seeing as vertex form. Okay, so like I said, this book just refers to this as the standard form. So we'll keep that in mind as we're working today. Okay, so this is also called vertex form. Why is it called vertex form?
Because it's an H and K vertex.
Yeah, because you can just look at the equation and you can pick out the vertex directly from there. So your vertex, let me use some other colors here. Your vertex here is going to be HK.
And
Okay.
also the min or max.
What's that?
Isn't it also the min or max?
Yes. Okay, so your vertex is going to be HK. Notice that this is the opposite. So if you saw x minus 3, really the h value is what? 3. If you saw x plus 5, the h value would be negative 5. And that's because it's really, if you see a positive, it's minus a negative. So when you simplify, minus a negative is going to be plus. Okay, so that's why that does look different. Now your value of a, so this value of a here, the value of a determines whether the function opens upward or downward, which basically means it determines whether the function is a minimum or a maximum. Okay, so if your a value is positive, then it's going to open upward. If it opens upward, then you have a minimum. If it's negative, that means it's gonna open downward, and if it opens downward, you have the highest point, which means you would have a maximum. So basically, if your A value is positive, you'll have a minimum, and if it's negative, you'll have a maximum. Okay, and A is always in front of the x squared, or if it's in your vertex form, it'll be in front of the parentheses. Alright, so let's look at example 1. It says a quadratic function is given. We're going to do two different things here. Okay, so we're going to express the function in standard form. So remember, that's where you can see your vertex. So in standard form. And then we're going to find its maximum or minimum value. So two different things that we have to do here. So the first thing we're going to do is write our f of x. So your f of x is going to be equal to x squared minus 8x plus 8. And then look at what I did here for you. So if you're having trouble, I do have some steps that you can follow. Step 1, it says use completing the square and balance the equation. And we'll talk about what that means to balance the equation. And then step 2, we're going to identify the max or the min. So when you're completing the square, I'm going to go over some helpful steps. Just by a show of hands, how many of you feel like you're a rock star at completing the square? Don't be shy. How many of you feel like you have no idea what the first thing you do is for completing the square? Okay, so a lot of you are in between.
Yes.
Okay, so what do you guys think your first step is?
Get the A on the outside, subtract
The A value?
18. Make sure A
Oh, I
value
got
is
you.
1 though.
Okay, yeah, so usually when you're completing the square, you move the C value over to the other side, right? When you are writing it in standard notation, you're going to keep everything on one side of the equation. So that's going to make it a little bit different. But yes, usually you are going to move the C value over, and then what do we usually do with B? Divided by 2 and square it, and then whatever we do to one side, we do to the other side. Alright, so for this, the first thing that you're going to do is you're going to group your x terms together. So underneath this, I'm putting 1, group x terms together. Alright, so for this, f of x equals x squared minus 8x. I'm going to group those two together, and then I still have plus 8. Okay, so because you're writing this with f of x, you don't want to move it over. Do you guys know what usually you put in for f of x if you're like trying to solve it? 0. You set it equal to 0 and then you solve. Okay, so step 1, group your x terms together. Then what we're going to do is we're going to add blank spaces. You do have to make sure that the a value for x squared is what? 1. Okay, so 2, check that a equals 1, and insert spaces. Okay, so is our a value 1 for this? Yep, so then the spaces I'm going to insert are going to be here, plus 8, and then I'm not going to put the sign next to the other one because that is actually going to change depending on what I have. So remember before, whatever I did to one side, I do to the other side. If they're on the same side of the equation, in order for you to balance the equation, you want whatever you add to be taken away so that it would be 0. Okay, so if I added 5 to this side, what would I have to do so the value would stay the same? Subtract 5. Because then it's like you're adding 0 and then that's not changing the value at all. Okay, so what you're going to do here is you are going to put b over 2 squared. Whatever goes here is the opposite of b over 2 squared. So in most cases, the opposite is going to be negative. There are some cases where it will be positive. positive, and we'll go over those cases. Okay, so do we know how to find our b value from this? Some of you aren't nodding, which makes me nervous. Okay, so remember this is where your b value is, right? So your b value is always in front of x. Okay, so Cameron, what is my b value for this? No. So that's your a. So this is your a. Your b value is negative 8. Okay, so it's going to be negative 8 over 2. Okay, and negative 8 divided by 2 is what? Negative 4. Okay, negative 4 squared is what? Positive 16. So what happened here, it's like I added 16. So if I added 16 here, then I have to do what here? Subtract 16. And again, whatever you add here, when you combine those two, you should get 0. Okay, so their sum should be 0. Now, I wrote negative 4 squared there. Some of you probably wrote 16, right? So it doesn't matter, but let's think about maybe why I did that, and some of you probably already know. So your next step is to do what with this trinomial? Yeah, you want to factor. So if you're going to factor x squared minus 8x plus 16, that would be x and x. What multiplies to 16 but adds to negative 8? Negative 4. So this is really x minus 4 squared. So why do I keep that there? Yeah, it's always going to be b over 2. So if I keep that there, when I'm writing my final f of x, which I am going to write over here, my f of x would be x minus 4 squared, and then what's 8 plus negative 16? Negative 8. Okay, so that would be my answer for part 1. Okay, so again, the reason why I keep the negative 4 there is that so I don't even have to think about my factoring. I know it's just going to be x minus 4 squared, and then I can add those two together. And then for step 2, we're going to identify the maximum and the minimum. And what we're going to do is we are going to write this in function notation.
Is that the other one?
What's that? Yeah, so like normally when something's written in function notation, it's like f of x, right? So we're going to have f of a number equals our min or max. So let's determine if it's a min or max. And Shauna, what are you thinking about that? Is this one going to be a min or a max? Okay, good. How do you know?
The A value is positive.
Good. So this is going to be a minimum. And that's because your A value is what? You guys know? 1. Okay, so if your A value is equal to 1, that means your A value is positive. It opens up. You have a minimum. When you're writing this in function notation, it might also help if you could identify the vertex. Okay, so, Shawan, could you tell me what the vertex is? That'll be part of it. So remember you have your H and then your K.
4, -8.
Yes, yep, so 4, -8. So remember your H value is usually the opposite of what you see, and then your K value is going to be exactly what you see. So your function notation would be f of 4 is equal to -8. And that would be function notation. Alright, and then I'm going to give you B and C. So if you wanted to work ahead, you could. And they're also on the board for you too. So for B, f of x is equal to -6x plus 1 plus 3x squared. And for C, f of x is equal to -x squared Okay, so do you know why I said this one looks a little different? Yeah, right? So it's not in the order of ax squared plus bx plus c, so that's what I would do first. Okay, so make sure it's in your, what we would usually think of as standard form. So we'd have f of x equals 3x squared minus 6x plus 1. And then I'm just going to look back up here. Oh, and your step 3, I didn't write this down up here. Your step 3 is to fill in spaces. Okay, and that's where you use the b over 2 squared. So if you want to add that direction in there, you are welcome to do so. Okay, so again, the first thing we want to do is group our x terms together. So I'm just going to group my first two terms. And then it says check if a is equal to 1. Is a equal to 1 here? No. What's my a value? Okay, my a value is 3. So if you do not have a equals 1, you are going to factor out the a value. And it doesn't necessarily have to be the GCF, but it does have to be the a value so that you have 1 in the place of a. So my a value for this is 3, so I'm going to factor out 3. When I'm factoring it out, really I'm just doing what? Yeah, I'm just dividing, right? So negative 6x divided by 3 is negative 2x. Let's say this was 7, because 3 doesn't go into 7 evenly, right? What would I have here? A fraction. It would just be what? 7 over 3, right? Negative 7 over 3. So it doesn't have to go into it evenly. You might have a fraction there. Okay, so that's fine. You can still do that with a fraction. Okay, for this one, we don't. It went in evenly, so we're good. Okay, so do you think you could fill in the blank space? And I'm going to keep that blank so that when you look back, you can see that. I'm just going to write the same thing over again. Okay, so Isha, what do you think? What's going to go in my first blank spot there?
1 squared.
Okay, so it would be negative 1 squared because that one's negative. And then some of you also put, and you could put 1. So you should either have negative 1 squared or 1. And either one of those are fine. Okay, now, because of this position, see how it's inside my parentheses? That means that whatever is in front would have to be distributed. So negative 1 squared is a positive 1, but you have to multiply by the 3. So you have to distribute. So it's not like I'm adding 1, it's like I'm adding 3. So if I'm adding 3, what else do I have to do? Subtract 3. So if I'm adding 3, then I subtract 3. Okay, and I'll say that one more time. So once you complete the square here, this is going to be a 1, but because we factored out the 3 from this trinomial, we have to distribute the 3 to that value. So 3 times our value here, which is 1, is going to be 3. So if I'm adding 3 here, then I'm going to have to subtract 3. And then from there, you're going to factor like usual. But now the 3 comes straight down in front. If I factor x squared minus 2x plus 1, I would get x minus 1 squared. And 1 minus 3 is going to be negative 2. Okay, so that is going to be your equation. And then see if you can do the second step. And let me know if you have questions. So what questions do you guys have on this part here? So we understand why this value's 3 because of the distribution.
Where's the 3 going?
You mean this one here?
Yeah.
That, so it's just, that's what you're adding. So it's technically not going anywhere. It's just if you were to expand x minus 1 squared, then you'd have to distribute the 3, and then you'd see that's really
you're
what you
saying so
added in.
for the other side of the, like, because you're subtracting 3 on the, or,
Yes, yeah.
that's where it's like effective.
Right. So I wouldn't want you to subtract 1 because then that wouldn't balance the equation.
So it stays the same in the parentheses, but.
Yes.
No, okay.
Exactly. So it stays the same in the parentheses. It's just because of this 3 on the outside that you'd have to remember that you would have to multiply the 3 by that value. Right? And really, how could you check that this answer is correct? Yeah, so you could FOIL it out, right? You could do x minus 1 squared, distribute the 3, subtract 2, and you should get your original problem. Okay? If you had your calculator, which you don't, you could also double check it that way and make sure that the vertex matched. Okay, so Carmen, what is my vertex for this?
3 -2.
The negative 2 part's right, and then,
1.
yeah, the first part's gonna be 1. Okay, so then we have to decide if we have a minimum or a maximum. Okay. Yep, go ahead, what is it? Yep, it is a minimum, how do you know?
Because the x is positive, so it's.
Yep, so your 3 is positive, so if the 3 is positive, it'll be a minimum because it's gonna open up. And then we're gonna write this in function notation. So f of 1 would equal negative 2. Okay, and if you haven't already started on part C, go ahead and do that.
Does it not matter that it's negative?
Yeah, it
So
always
you
has to be
factor
1.
that out?
Yeah. Okay, so is your a value equal to 1? No, it's equal to what? Negative 1. Okay, so we are going to have to factor that out. So when you factor it out, remember the signs become opposite. Okay, so Kenny, what is going to go in this first blank?
The first blank, it's gonna be, there'd be 2 squared.
Cut it in half.
And,
So,
oh, yeah,
so
it'd
half
be-
of B,
Yeah, it'd be 1 squared.
it would be,
It'd be 2 over negative.
yeah, negative 2. Yep, okay, so negative 2 over 2, which would be negative 1. So negative 1 squared, which is like a positive 1. But then, Charlie, what do we have to remember?
That when you have a negative, you have to subtract it.
Okay, so here you have the negative, right? You have to distribute that. So really, what we're doing here, this is like negative 1 times 1. So I'm subtracting 1 here. If I'm subtracting 1 here, what do I have to do in this blank? Add 1. Okay, so again, when you add those, it should equal 0. So now I'm going to keep the negative on the outside. This is a negative 1, so it's x minus 1 squared. Negative 1 plus 1 is what? 0. So that is going to be your function. Yes.
So I'm doing it, I'm pulling the something
Oh,
separate.
and then you're subtracting it back?
Yeah, but it's messing me all up because I'm like, I'm not getting the same C term. I'm always getting the same A and B as you, but like it's just never the same C
You're
term.
probably just adding the incorrect,
I'm gonna-
value, so I'll look at that. But yeah, if you move the C term over, then you would just have to subtract everything over at the end. So let me look at yours. So then for the next part, we have to determine if it's a maximum or minimum. Isabella, what's this one gonna be?
Maximum,
Good, and how do you know?
because it's a negative one.
Good, yep, so you have the negative there, so it's gonna be a maximum. Alright, and then Hannah, do you think you could tell me what that is in function notation?
I'm sorry, what?
Do you think you could tell me what the, function notation would be? So like the f of,
Oh, f of, would it be 1
yep,
and then equals 0?
yep.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's always the opposite of what you see here. So if you see x minus 1, it will be positive 1, and then it'll always be this k value, and if there's nothing added on the outside, then it is going to be 0. Okay, let's go ahead and flip it over. And for this, we are going to find the maximum or minimum value, and we are going to do it using algebra. So we've already practiced doing this with our graphing calculator. Now we're not gonna have that, and we are gonna find it by hand, which is actually gonna be really nice. Cause remember when we were having trouble picking the windows? Hey, you never have to struggle through that again. You can always find what your value is, and then you would always be able to do your window. But then it would make that obsolete, because if you already solved it using algebra, you wouldn't have to use it.
Even though you said if you make that
Okay, so you should have already done the first step, and that's to do what? Yeah, I would rewrite it so it's in the proper form, right? If you rewrite it so it's in the proper form, it's gonna be a lot easier to pick out your values. Okay, and that would be your f of t. So remember, this is the form that you want this in, ax squared plus bx plus c. So it says find the x coordinate of the vertex, use the formula. Do you guys remember that formula from your algebra 2 days? No? Carmen, do you know it? The one to find the x coordinate of the vertex? Or the axis of symmetry? No? Charlie, you don't remember? Alright, I'll tell you. X equals the opposite of b over 2a. Oh. I even broke out the algebra 2 book for one of the earlier classes and showed them where it was. Okay, so now what we're gonna do is we're going to calculate that. So if you want, you can write down your a value and your b value. Okay, so Marla, what is our a value gonna be if we're looking at this equation?
N minus 10
Yep. And what's our b value, Marla?
minus 40.
Good. Okay, so what I have to do is the opposite of b over 2a. Okay, so if b is negative 49, Dennis, what's the opposite of that going to be? Positive 49. Good. Okay, and then Munir, what am I gonna have on the bottom?
-7.
Close, 2 times.
7.
Yeah. Okay, so then I have 49 over -14. Can I reduce that at all? Yeah, what goes into both? Okay, so then if I divide by 7, I'll have 7 over 2. So that is going to be the x coordinate. So if I know the x coordinate, how do I find the y? You just plug it into the equation, right? Even if you forgot, step 2, substitute the value of x into the equation. Okay, so remember we want to make sure we can do this without our calculator. So f of -7 over 2 is going to equal, and I'm going to use my standard form, so -7 times -7 over 2 squared minus 49 times -7 over 2 plus 100. Okay, so I have to follow my order of operations. So what part of this should I be doing first? Squaring. So Jory, when I square -7 over 2, do you know what I get? So whenever you have a fraction, you want to square the top, square the bottom. So square it. You're multiplying by 2.
14.
No. You're doing times 2, and you have to do 7 times itself. So -7 times -7. Yes, 49. Yep. Okay, and then 2 squared is going to be 4. Yes, good. Okay, now when you're multiplying and you have a whole number and a fraction, you're going to be multiplying this whole number by what part of the fraction? The top. Okay? So this is a negative times a negative, so I know it's going to be positive. And then just to the side, I'm just going to do this, right? 49 times 7. This would be 63. Carry the 6. 28 plus 6 is going to be 34. So I have 343 over 2 plus 100. Okay, well here I also have to multiply. It's -7 times 49. Didn't I just do 7 times 49? Yes, I did. I think you guys were here when it happened. Okay, so yeah, this is going to be -343 over 4 plus 343 over 2 plus 100. So if I'm going to add fractions together, what do I need? Common denominator. What's my common denominator? 4. So this is times 2 over 2. This would be times 4 over 4. So you have -343 over 4. What's 343 doubled? 686. You just double each one of those numbers. Okay, now if this is 343 times 2, and you take away 343, what are you left with? 343. Yep, over 4. And then plus 400 over 4, and you can just go ahead and add straight across. So 743 over 4, and you can leave it just like that. Okay, so that is one of your more intensive examples. And then we have to identify if it's a maximum or a minimum. Noelle, what's this one going to be?
Maximum,
Yep, tell me how you know.
because the A term is -7.
Yep, exactly. So your A term is -7, that's negative, and then we're going to write it in function notation. So f of -7 over 2 is equal to 743 over 4. And there you go. Okay, so this one you're going to do by yourself. This one is a little bit quicker because you don't have fractions to work with, but I did want to do a more difficult example with you. Okay, so I want you to do part B on your own, and then we'll check and make sure that we get that. And as soon as you're done with that, go ahead and go to page 231 in your textbook. x equals 1/2 x squared plus 2x minus 6. And yes, without your calculator. Okay, double check and make sure that you found the correct x value. Okay, did you guys get -2 okay? 2 times and a half was 1, so you got -2 when you divided. And then again, order of operations. -2 squared is 4. This would be plus a -4 minus 6. So this is 2. -4 minus 6 is -10, so this would be -8. So then you have to tell me if that's a max or a min. This one will be a minimum. And this time it's h. So it's h of -2 equals -8. Okay, and then once you get to page 231, I want you to read through that, and the first thing I want you to write down is the question that they're asking you. Okay, so what question are you trying to answer? And then from there, you could write down important information. And again, we're doing that motion.
Quiet down back there, Laszlo.
Yeah, peeps.
Yeah, Doug, you say you're okay?
Oh, she never.
Thank you.
Okay, so you're reading through the question, and then you are writing that down. Okay, Michaela, what question are we trying to answer for this? What is it asking you? Okay, so it says how many trees should be planted, right, per acre to yield the maximum amount of apples? Is that what you guys wrote down? How many trees should be planted per acre to yield the maximum amount of apples? Okay, so let's kind of analyze that equation that they give you. They do give you an equation, which did some of you write that down? Yep, some of you wrote that down and didn't write the question down. It's important to understand what they're asking you too. So this is your equation. A of n equals n times 900 minus 9n. Well, we don't know what we have to solve for if we don't know what those variables mean. Okay, who can tell me what n means? What is n? No. What is n? The number of trees planted per what? Yeah. Okay, so the n is the number of trees per acre. Your a of n is the number of apples produced per acre. So when when they're asking you to find how many trees should be planted per acre, are we trying to find my N value or the A of N value? What do you guys think? What do you think? What do we think over here? The N or the A of N value? So what are we trying to find? What was the question we wrote down? Okay, how many trees, right? Which one represents the amount of trees? The N or the A of N? The N, okay, so you are gonna be finding the N value or the input value. Okay, so we can go ahead and we can do that by hand. So if they gave you, your equation is A of N equals N times 900 minus 9N, we can distribute the N. And then how can I find the input? What equation would I use? Opposite of B over 2A, right? Wouldn't that give you the N value of the vertex, right? Okay, so your maximum value we know is the same thing as the vertex. We have to find the N or the input or the X value of that vertex. So we can use X equals the opposite of B over 2A. So my B value for this is what? Positive 900, right? Because that's in front of the N. And then my A value is negative 9. Okay, so if I do the opposite of B over 2A, I'll have negative 900 over negative 18. A negative divided by a negative is a positive. And that will be positive 50. And again, if you are doing that out without a calculator, you'd ask yourself how many times does 18 go into 90? And you could estimate, if that was 20, about how many times would it go in there? I'd probably try 4 first, and then I'd see, oh, that's 72, could I fit another 18 in there? Yep, so that would be 90, so that would be 5, so then it would be 50. Okay? So really, you could stop there. You could stop there, and once you find that it's 50, you know that you should plant 50 trees. Now, depending on what problem you have, they might ask you to find the output. So if you're trying to find the output, all you'd have to do is plug that back into your original equation. And then, so this means that the maximum amount of apples would be 22,500. Okay, so you should plant 50 trees to yield 22,500 apples. Now, you are going to have to be able to do this without a calculator, but let's say that you were using your calculator. This one might be a little bit harder to find because your Y window would have to at least reach the 22,500 mark, right? Your X value would have to go out to, if this is 50, I usually double it, because if you didn't double it, you'd only see half of the parabola. So if you doubled it, then you'd be able to see the full parabola. So if you are having trouble finding your window, all you'd have to do is find your vertex, and then you would just find it with algebra anyway. Okay, so if you were using your graphing calculator to find that. All right, so page 230 is going to be your homework. You don't have to do part B for this. I just reminded you here that you are going to want to use algebra and not use your calculator, because there will be a no calculator portion. And then that will be your first assignment that is on your homework log, is your 3.1.